guys, we're back this week with our friction labs. So you should have already done the friction presentation and the friction study guide. And you know from doing that, that friction is resistance between two objects that are moving, or an object that's moving over a surface, even if it's like your hands. And that resistance to moving is what causes heat energy when you rub your hands back and forth together. So let's look at some different levels of friction, if we want to call it that, how a surface can affect how much friction that there actually is. To start with, you're going to need to set up your lab sheet, and it needs to look like this. So you're making 3 columns and 2 rows, and you're calling your columns desk. This was designed to be in the classroom, so we're not using a desk, but this will be my desk. It's a nice smooth surface like your desk in the classroom is. Another row called wax. We're using waxed paper here. If you want to repeat this at home, you might have some of this in the kitchen. And then a piece of sandpaper is the other thing that we're using. So we'll go one step at a time here, and I'm following the directions on your lab sheet. You have this in your teams where you can be looking at it. So the first step in the lab was to measure and mark 2-inch line, 2 inches down to the end of the card. I've done that. I took a razor knife and I cut a slit in it, which is step 2, where it says your teacher will do this for you. Step 3, insert the paper clip in. I've done that already, so you can see that that is ready to go. The paper clip's just through the slit here. Step 4, slide the rubber band onto the paper clip. There we go, that's done. Step 5, tie the string onto the rubber band or loop it through. So I've tied the string onto the rubber band. So now I've done 1 through 5 here. And step 6 is to make the data chart in your notebook. So pause the video here and do that. I'm obviously just going to keep on going, but you should pause it and get that data chart set up. All right, so now we're going to place the card on the table. We're going to set our weight on it. And if you're at home, you can use any kind of a weight. I wouldn't use like a glass or something that might fall over and break, but any kind of a weight. It can be a stapler, a bottle of glue, a bottle of water. It doesn't matter. There's anything that's got some weight to it. All right, and now we're going to gently pull. I'm going to prep my marker here. I'm going to just gently pull on the rubber band. I don't want the card to move yet, but I want to be right at that point where it's going to try to move. So I'm marking the back of my card here, and I'm marking where the rubber band is. All right, and so I'm going to label that start. All right, now I want to actually measure the distance of what it's going to take just sitting on the desk. The distance I'm going to stretch this rubber band before I can get this moving. All right, so at start, I've got tension on it there, but if I go any farther than that, it's going to move. And I'm going to pull until it actually starts moving. So my moving is right about that far out. All right, I'm going to label the blue on desk. Now what we're going to do with that, I'm going to slide the card back to my start point here. What we're going to do with that is we're going to measure how far we were actually stretching the rubber band. So I'm measuring from the end of the paper clip here, measuring from the end of the paper clip while I'm on my start line here to my start, and I'll get 3 inches. So on my data chart, I'm going to put, that's start. Start is 3 inches. So my data chart, I'm going to go 3 3/4 inches for desk. That's how far my stretch of the rubber band was. All right, and now we're going to do it with a different material. So again, I'm back on my starting line over here, and I am changing off from, I think it's wax paper next, isn't it? Yes, wax paper next. I'm changing from the desk to wax paper, and see if that changes what we're dealing with here. Put the weights back on it. All right, so we've got our sheet of wax paper down. I'm taping the wax paper down to the desk, to my whiteboard here, but if you're doing this at home, do it to your desk or table. We don't want the surface to move, just like I didn't want the table moving when I was doing it originally. I want the card sliding over the surface because we're examining friction levels in the surfaces. So I'm putting my card, thank you, putting my card back on here, on the wax paper, which is taped down, so the wax paper is not going to move, only the card's going to move. All right, apply a little bit of tension here and pull. Sorry, I forgot to grab my marker. Pull, and I'm getting some motion there. So I'm marking that with my red line, and this is wax paper. Okay, so we'll measure that in just a minute. Let's go with the next surface, which is going to be sandpaper here. And it doesn't matter what kind of sandpaper you use, although we're going to do a couple of steps with sandpaper. The lab just says sandpaper. It doesn't care what. So this is actually a pretty rough sheet of sandpaper. You can tell on the back, it's 80 grit, which means for every square inch on here, there's 80 diamond pieces. Industrial diamond, don't think you can go sell it. It's not worth anything. But it makes it very, very rough. Like just touching it like that is a little bit uncomfortable because it's so rough. So this is a very rough sheet of sandpaper. Back to my starting point. Put the weight in place. Get a little tension on. And I'm going to write in black marker this time, so I got my black marker ready. All right, I got tension on. I'm tensioning. I'm tensioning. I'm tensioning. Hello. I'm still tensioning. Nothing's happening. Oh, there we go. Pulling fairly hard, and it's just starting to move. Pulling hard. Oh, there it goes. Ah, bummer. I had to pull so hard, I pulled it out from under the tape. Let's tape it down again and see if we can fix that. One of the problems with sandpaper is that the surface is so rough that the tape doesn't want to stay on it. Here we are again. Tensioning. I'm going to try to mark it with my finger. There's no way I'm going to get a marker out there when it finally starts to move. All right, so I was that far out when I first got movement. Got my marker. Give that a mark, and that is sandpaper. I'm going to make a note here that that's my 80 grit sandpaper. All right, so for the lab, we're not going to measure. Here's my starting point down here. Whoops, nope, that's not what I'm doing. There's my starting point down there lined up with the back of the card. I'm measuring from the end of the paper clip to my mark, and I get 6 inches for sandpaper. And while I'm at it, I still need to do my wax paper. From the end of the paper clip to the wax paper, I'm at 3 inches. 2 3/4, I'm going to be exact there. All right, so sandpaper was 6 inches, so now I'm on my data sheet here. I got 2 3/4 inches for wax paper. I've got 6 inches for sandpaper. So your data sheet should look like this as well. All right, so that's what you need for the lab. Now your job is to write down what you saw, that's your observations, and also write down your conclusions. Why did you see what you saw? But one last step before you go, just to make this interesting, is let's just throw a different sheet of sandpaper on and see what happens here. This is 100 grit, which means that for every square inch, there's 100 pieces of diamond, and it makes it a little bit less rough. It's still not comfortable, like you don't want to rub this on your nose, but it is not as rough as the 80 grit. And let's just see if that makes any difference. Yeah, we're good. tape down. Okay. And again, I'm going to track this with my finger because it might move too quickly for me to get it with a marker here. All right, started to move right here. I'm going to use my red marker for that one. And I'm going to say this was 100 grit sandpaper there. So nothing you have to write in your lab for this, but just while you're thinking about your conclusion, put this in your mind that 80 grit sandpaper is rough sandpaper, very, very coarse. And we had a 6-inch stretch on our rubber band to get it to move there. With 100 grit sandpaper, which is much less coarse, we had less distance that we had to travel. It's not a lot less, but the fact that it is less actually says something pretty significant. And if you have sandpaper at home, drop down to like a sheet of 200. I don't have a sheet of 200 right now, otherwise we would try that. But it's actually not very gritty. For sandpaper, it's pretty smooth. And try and see what you think of that. But that is our how far lab. How far do we stretch the rubber band to see what we get? So write your observations and then write a paragraph that says, this is what I saw and why I saw it.